Hey everyone, welcome back to your favorite go-to-market podcast. I'm your host, Ross Rich, and today we have a very special guest, typically also out of Toronto, but maybe not today. We have Taylor Jones here, the VP of Sales at CoLab Software. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, before we dive in and talk about the typical strategies and tactics to drive execution excellence, we'd love the audience to get to know you a bit. So how did you find your way into revenue leadership?
Yeah, to try to shorten a long version of a story, I think, like most sales leaders, I accidentally fell into sales originally. I originally was going to go into optometry school out of university.
As
And
sales leaders do, yep.
as sales leaders do, right? I feel like everybody's got a different version of the same story. And decided not to do that, deferred my acceptance, and literally went into Google and typed in business science jobs, which now people probably would do ChatGPT and get a lot of different options, but back then it was a lot different. I found myself into a pharma company doing business analyst work, prospecting, Salesforce admin, marketing automation, cold calling, a whole bunch of kind of sales things, and kind of fell in love with the kind of ownership or entrepreneurial aspect of sales. Back then, I was in Winnipeg, not a lot of, I guess, tech jobs. It was a little bit of a hodgepodge of agriculture and pharma and other random industries. But I ended up moving to Toronto, got into software sales when a recruiter found me. And kind of the rest is history. I was now been in software sales for, I think, about 10 or 11 years. Was an individual contributor, BDR, AE, the classic story.
Yep.
And I thought I'd never be a leader. I thought, you know what, I love taking kind of my business in my own hands and not having anybody else to kind of control my number or control my destiny. But I remember feeling this point. I'd probably been selling for about 2.5 years as an AE. And I remember thinking, if I could teach everybody on my team how to do what I'm doing, we would be able to scale so much faster. And I remember this pivot point, and I started teaching BDRs how to do Sandler selling and started teaching different methodologies like social selling, all these different things, and really loved it. So that was kind of my pivot point. So now I've been in revenue leadership for I think about 6 or 7 years.
Awesome. Awesome. Um, what did you find the hardest transition point from being a top seller to being then a sales leader?
Yeah, I think like the biggest thing is what worked for you doesn't work for everybody. And that is really hard when you're top of your game, you're executing, you're like, yes, I can just teach people how to do this and everybody can do the same thing as me. And that's just not true. There are so
Yes.
many different factors into what makes an AE successful. And part of it is, as you know, mindset, work ethic, like the classic kind of really hardworking attributes of a really strong account executive, or BDR for that matter. But some of it is actually just style. So, the things that work really well for some AEs or some BDRs are not the things that work well for others. And so I think that was the hardest part, is making sure that what I was teaching or how I was teaching, whatever it was, worked for everybody in a specific way, or that I taught it differently to each person so that they could kind of capture that and make it their own and be able to be successful with it.
Yeah, that really resonates with my experience as well. Going from being an AE to leading a team is you want to do that because, like you just said, hey, if everyone was doing what I was doing, they'd be super successful. They'd make a lot more money. They'd feel much more reward in their job. But like everyone has their strengths and everyone has their weaknesses and is totally built differently. So I think that's definitely, I think, kind of across the board, most people's first learnings of the challenge of management is unfortunately you can't give the same playbook and the same coaching to everyone. It's very unique. But I think within that, and what really drove me related to all this Accord stuff is like what are the common threads of like you said, the characteristic traits, or like, hey, someone might be great at doing their own way of selling, but like at a minimum we still need to talk to X number of people at an account. We still need to do certain things. So how do you think about kind of the difference between what are those common threads of things that everyone just needs to be doing, and then how to customize some of your leadership and management to kind of the unique personalities of your team?
Yeah, I think so. Part of it is just like call it a sales acumen piece, right? And sales acumen can be a lot of different things. So being able to make a cold call and effectively get somebody to book a meeting with you, right?
Yeah.
Is kind of a generic, I'll call it sales skill, and it's a sales acumen thing. So it's being really confident with the right, opening questions, the right asks, the right length of pitch, the right tonality, right? There's a lot of different pieces that go to that.
Yeah.
And there can be different versions of it, but generally like a really good cold call has like a very specific kind of number of flavors and things that you do. And you have to have the mindset to be able to pick up the phone and actually make that cold call, right? And there's a mindset thing there that is consistent across all salespeople. But how effective that is going to be may change based on the rep, right? So I was a BDR leader for a very long time, so I do use a lot of BDR examples, and I think it's applicable to BDRs and AEs anyway. But if you make a cold call, some people are really good at picking up the phone, making 100 dials, and booking, 1 in 10 calls. And that's just like, they're really effective at that. That's their strategy. They're really confident. They sit there. They're probably, if you watch them making a cold call, they look super laissez-faire, and they're just like super confident and can get through the phone really quickly. Other people may not have that same level of confidence. So for them, that level of prep and customization that they have to do in advance may be a lot higher, but they may now have a little bit more of a tailored pitch and be able to convert, 2 out of 10 calls. So I think like the general sales acumen overall is the same, and the general attitude has to be the same, and there's a benchmark there. But then where you flex kind of in terms of either volume or confidence or customization, I think that's where you have to start looking at the numbers or the data and figuring out, what is this person's strength, or where do they feel really confident, and how do I adjust their style or give them advice to be able to be more effective in their own way.
Totally. And I love how you're kind of anchoring on and normalizing on the outcome, because so many people, focus on, I think we can joke about the activity, which is funny, say that it's such a meme, but it's like, that's literally how 90% of teams that I still see that we talk to focus on. And like, hey, yeah, typically some of the strongest performers need fewer activities, but might be doing more research before, might just be more effective at it so they can work on other parts of the process. So
for sure. And I think like there's obviously a bare minimum, right? So
yes,
you can't
just
book a
do
meeting
something to create something. Yes.
Yeah. You can't book a meeting on a cold call without making cold calls. Or if you're making 10 calls a week, you're probably not going to be very effective. So going back to like the bare minimum, there is a bare minimum that you have to teach, which is a general, sales execution or acumen. But again, going back to your comment, like I know really great reps that make $20 a day and are my top performing versus those that make $100 a day and maybe lowest performing. And so those things also happen too.
Totally. Instincts on accounts or stakeholders to reach out to, not even just the effectiveness, but like, hey, like some people I think just have great instincts on the who to reach out to, both at the company level and the person. And maybe they're even lower converting than the people doing 100 accounts, but they just happen to have that sixth sense of the who. So it's a really, really good point.
Yeah, and I think like if you think about more transactional selling versus enterprise selling too, this is where that flex can really show, is like the types of skill and the level of, I call it effort or sales acumen or business acumen that you need to, right? Because if you're selling deals that are, $500 or $1,000 or something that's really transactional, making a ton of cold calls might be super effective because you've got probably a super high ICP. You've got a very large TAM.
Yeah.
And so you can go through as many calls as you want. It's just a numbers game. But if your TAM is only, like 250 accounts and it's 50 people per account is who you're calling, that strategy is very different. And the level of detail and complexity to that conversation or to that strategy is also a lot different. So I think that kind of plays into it too.
Totally. Well, let's kick off with kind of the meat of it, the 3 strategies we're going to be talking to today that you've kind of prioritized around how you think about driving execution excellence across revenue teams. The first one, I love this because this is one of the reasons why I got hooked on sales and B2B sales, was kind of owning your own destiny and understanding that kind of data-driven approach and transparency of what you need to do to be successful as a seller. Like I would obsess over the start of the year, start of quarter, hey, my ACV, what leads I have coming into the quarter, how I need to fill that, and just like really understanding what I would need to do from, top of funnel conversion to be successful, and kind of working backwards, which you don't really get in other jobs, right? It's not so black and white of as a project manager, as an engineer, as a marketer, how to be successful. So curious to hear how you think about that and helping do some of that translation for your team, because I don't think everyone really understands those numbers coming into the role.
Yeah, and I think it's really hard now. We're lucky that when I was a seller, I didn't have access to a lot of data. I had Salesforce, and that was about it. Which Salesforce is great. You can do a lot with Salesforce to manipulate the data to get what you're looking for. But now we've got all these AI tools. We've got Gong, we've got Outreach. Everything's measuring conversions and win rates and propensity to buy and aging. And there's so many different tools out there. It's actually almost overwhelming now where you've got so much stuff and you have to figure out like what's the best place to focus. And I think that's really challenging for people now too, but also a huge opportunity for those that leverage it really well. And our team specifically right now has been doing a lot of work with AI on trying to find ways to take everything we have, distill it down to something that's really translatable, to be able to give us the insights, to be able to optimize as quick as possible. And I think that's a huge opportunity in the market right now. But we think about like data and conversions. There's kind of two types of sales reps I find, at least early in their career. They're the ones that often say, I know and I feel. And those that say, I'm looking at the numbers and here's what I know is possible. And if it doesn't work out, here's what I'm going to do to pivot. It's kind of like I find that there's two types. There's like the I feel, and then the like constantly looking at the numbers and trying to figure out, okay, where can I miss? Or if I miss, how do I fix this based on the data? So obviously I'll focus on the second one. So when we think about like conversions and data, again, going back to like, there's so much information. For me, what I typically try to do is holistically look at the business or the team as comparative to each other or based on industry or based on, different parameters and figure out, where is one hotspot for each individual rep and how can I narrow in their focus on coaching or training and development in that one area? And how do I call attention to that so it's not overwhelming? So that's typically how I guide my team is I'll look, at aging as an example. And I'll notice, one of my top reps who's like completely crushing his numbers but very inconsistent may have really long aging compared to other reps in stage, 3, 4, but may have really high convert rates. To me, that's a signal that they're having the right conversations. They're definitely doing the right actions. They're talking to the right people, but they're probably not executing as quickly in terms of like asking for next steps. And they might be asking for things sequentially versus doing things, at the same time, like legal, security, et cetera. And so stages are dragging. And so by being able to point to that, it's a lot easier to say, okay, now let's look at that specific stage and figure out what are you doing and how are you doing it? And how do we, 2x that speed to get deals closed faster, as an example. So I think it's really about like, okay, what is all the data available to us? What are the most important things that we think we should be looking at? How does the team stack right against each other to figure out, is there a hotspot that maybe I'm identifying across the whole team or specific reps have specific hotspots? And then how do we provide coaching and enablement to that specific place to be able to get them to optimize? And then once we get there, then we pick the next thing and then focus on the next thing to drive action from there.
Yeah, no, it's a great framework. I think one of the challenges that I see across other companies is not that shared language around what does, like your examples there, what does stage 3 and 4 really mean? And I think people are using these words and these stages that don't really have the same understanding from the AE to the manager to leadership. And it sounds like you guys have done a really good job of kind of having and defining that shared language and using it on a daily basis, which is, I think, like the starting point for any of these like helpful conversations.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I think creating transparency of like what good looks like and constantly looking at the data to figure out like, are there outliers to this data? Is the market changing, which is causing the data to change, right? Like for us, right now we sell in manufacturing companies. Tariffs are completely kind of crushing our soul a little bit. But I think we're doing actually a really great job at combating as best as we can. But of course, there's going to be impacts to sales stages, right? So late stage, it may take a little bit longer in the buying process than it typically is. But if we can measure that, benchmark it, and then watch that metric and make sure that we are, able to reduce it over time, that it's actually not just like a performance thing, it's actually more of an economy thing, but also be mindful that if it is an economy thing, okay, how do we A, protect ourselves from it, and B, what can we do maybe in the front of the cycle to be able to accelerate it to try not to reduce the overall or increase the overall stage of a deal. And so again, it's paying attention and being able to like constantly look at the data and the same data points to make sure, are we still on track? Are we progressing? Are we regressing? And then like, how do we course adjust from there?
Totally. Love it. Well, shifting gears a bit from kind of the data side to kind of more strategic focus, I love the quote here as number 2 of your execution excellence priorities was the ROI of time.
Yeah.
What does that mean to you?
Yeah, my team, if they listen to this, will be like, oh my gosh, Taylor says this every single day. I don't even know when I coined this. I think it was early days at CoLab, actually. But when I first joined CoLab, our team had a plethora of opportunities. An AE's dream is, unlimited pipeline.
Yeah.
And it truly was, I felt unlimited when I joined. Every rep had so much pipeline, we physically couldn't keep up. And we're working with really large enterprises, right? And so our TAM isn't that big. We have to really deeply multi-thread. We have to sell at multiple different levels of an organization. And I could just tell that my reps were just spread way too thin, and we weren't really getting the velocity we needed in anything. And so I suggested to my team during QBRs, I said, I want you to go through this exercise, and I want you to think about the ROI of your time. I want you to take your week, however many hours approximately you're working, give yourself a bit of buffer, and I want you to break down every single opportunity or account in your pipeline and tell me how many hours a week you're going to work on that account and why. And put a dollar value beside it, and let's talk about it during QBRs. And it was really interesting the first time we did this, because some people get really fixated on really shiny objects, right? Like you get a really cool company name.
Yeah, I want this account, and it might be the smallest, but you're not really doing that translation. Totally.
Exactly. Or the convert rate on it, is like 5 or 10% at that stage when you've got these like $500,000 deals, which require way more effort, but more likely to get to your number and help the company target. And so it was a really interesting exercise the first time we did it. I'd actually say the team now is really good at it, because it's like the one thing I'm harping on, like honestly every single day. And now I have reps like almost daily being like, hey, I'm overwhelmed. My time is not spent well on these opportunities. I know I'm doing them a disservice. Can you give them to somebody else?
Wow.
And I honestly have opportunities switching around all the time, which sometimes for those early stage opportunities is probably not the best, way to manage opportunities, as we're trying to figure out load balance and that sort of stuff. But to me, as a sales leader, it makes me really happy to hear like reps really being honest with themselves and being honest with like what is best for them, which also is best for the business. And how do we figure out how they hit their target, how the company hits their target, and how do we do right by this pipeline that we have, and make sure that we are giving its best chance to mature and be able to go through the funnel, while also making sure our reps are able to hit their quotas and run towards these targets. So it's kind of ROI of time is like, where's your time best spent? Short term, long term, and how do we course adjust to make sure that you're actually focusing on the things that are most important, not the things that are just shiny objects in front of you.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really cool culture that you've all developed, because I hear the opposite sometimes of like people stealing leads out of Salesforce and like X number of days, if not touched, then it goes to someone else, versus being proactive and knowing, hey, these are the 2 things that are going to make my quarter, and these are the leads I'm working on for next quarter. I understand my business so well, kind of going back to the last part, the data-driven, understanding and controlling your destiny of like, I know how to hit my number, and I'm able to understand these deals aren't going to get the love, or it doesn't make sense to work on these because I'd be, having my hands full to execute on these couple key accounts. So, and I think as part of the maturing of a business, right, is at first you start like very wide and you're like, hey, we can sell to anyone, or, and then you kind of start to understand what does a good sales process look like? How long does it take? How many stakeholders do we need to engage? How long is it, all those kind of pieces to really be able to, understand how you need to run your day and like you said, the ROI of time.
And especially now, like we noticed, like one trend that we really started digging into is if we didn't have access to an economic buyer early in our process, especially now with the way the economy is, it either stalled or killed our deals, kind of like call it stage 4. And that wasn't as clear cut of an indicator early days. Like we could have deals that had just really strong champions. We'd kind of bypass the economic buyer. They just kind of sign the contract. That's a lot less true now with the way we've seen things happen in the last 4 to 6 months. And so the amount of effort and time that is needed to build that relationship or build the effective story to be able to get that economic buyer on the phone is really different than what it used to be. And so we're noticing the time dedication at, stage 3, 4, 5 is a lot more than it was maybe 6 months ago. And so it also takes the reps kind of a little bit of kind of internalizing of their pipeline and what their effort level is to make sure that they didn't do all this effort up front and then the deal dies at stage 4 or stalls, because like that feels so much worse when you've put that much effort up front. And so being
Yeah.
able to figure that out too is important, to figure out like, is the time best spent there, or is it best spent on this like new shiny object that's like exciting, will help my pipeline in 12 months, but it's going to negatively impact me short term, which, isn't worth it.
Totally. And thinking through, like getting stuck with some of those maybe accounts, it kind of forces you, if you do understand, hey, we need this type of person at this stage, well, am I going to go and maybe lose it now?
Yep.
Which is fine, which is probably better than in 4 months realizing it was lost then, and you kind of understand where you need to spend the time and move on to the next, maybe new lead.
For sure. And I definitely have those, right? Like I have a mentality with our calling it smaller accounts, we'll call it, where it's like win quick, kill quick.
Yeah.
And you see that hesitation when you get to stage, 4, and it's like right there, but you haven't won it quick, and it's a small account and it's a small like ACV. It's like you got to make that really hard decision, is like, do I just like kill it and go focus on something else? And I mean, that's a challenge for everybody, obviously, giving up pipeline that's late stage. So
Totally, totally. Well, the last piece we're going to talk about, kind of stepping back and thinking about kind of this culture of collaboration and low ego and kind of pace of learning. So curious how you think about, especially as a high growth company like CoLab, how you think about, you start with the AEs and you bring in BDRs and you bring in RevOps, then enablement and marketing. How do you think about, effectively, obviously championing sales, but also working across those different teams?
yeah, I mean, this is a challenge, I think, for every company, especially high growth. Like we have, I think we've like 3x since I've joined in the last like 11 months, and the pace of learning is just astronomical. A, because we're learning, what's working, what's not working. B, we're launching new products. We just launched a new AI product that we're, rolling out new messaging and enablement and demo environments. So that is a challenge. Again, I keep mentioning the economy, but for us, it is really impactful to our business right now. And so pivoting and learning different messaging and understanding how to consult businesses differently on their strategy and
Yeah.
how we help is totally new. And then, before when I first joined, I think we had like 6 AEs, so they could easily get on a phone, talk with each other. And we still do that to some extent as a team every week. But we're about 3x the size of a team as we were, when I first joined. And so that level of collaboration and, asking those questions out loud is also just a little bit different, because you don't get as many opportunities. There's so many voices in the room. Some
Yeah.
people might be newer, a little bit more shy. So it's a huge challenge. And then you've got CS layered on, and we only had a couple CS reps when we first joined. And now the CS team is also 3x. And now our customer accounts are growing, and so now we need them more embedded. So I think it's a very iterative process for us. We are constantly learning new ways of how to collaborate together in the most effective way, without it being noisy, because Slack, as you know, also just creates a lot of noise and
Yeah.
opportunity for collaboration. It can be both. But for us, I think like the biggest thing is just not having an ego and not being afraid to over communicate and ask for help when needed is kind of like my overarching kind of advice and feedback. Is like, my best reps are those that are calling me 7 times a day. And sure, you're like, oh, your reps are calling you 7 times a day, that must be a distraction. At our stage of growth, revenue is most important. And so if my reps are asking me or talking through every thought in their head,
Yeah.
it is more likely that I've just shaved off a day, 2 days, a week off of that deal cycle, because I'm catching things a lot faster. And it's not because the reps don't know what they're doing. It's because we are moving so quick and they're doing so many things at once that just like sometimes having that 10-minute conversation allows them to work through either the ideas themselves, or a couple small nuggets that I say get them to latch onto new things that then accelerate the deal. And I think when we talk about collaboration, it's the same goes for CS and BDRs. So the best AEs are the quarterbacks in their deals that are calling the BDRs and saying, like, when you got this cold call, what are the things that were like resonated that I can pick up on? Or they're taking those BDR intro call scripts and putting them in ChatGPT and trying to figure out how do they get the best discovery questions. And then they're passing that back to BDR to get their feedback. And same with CS, right? When they're in a customer account and they're trying to expand, they're constantly asking the CS, like, what's going on in this conversation? How do we get access to these new people? Here's some ideas I had. And so we think about like culture of collaboration. To me, it's like not having an ego of like just ownership, or like not having an ego of like, oh, it's BDR's job to do this, so I'm not going to like talk to them about this thing. It's like no ego, check it at the door, ask for help, ask for feedback, collaborate, communicate frequently and often, and just make sure that like, everybody has a voice in everything that you're doing so that we can just run as fast as possible.
Yeah, and I think one of the kind of interesting learnings from that is like the difference in perspective. It's like, hey, it's not like you're not saying I'm smarter than these reps that are calling me. It's I'm gonna have a different perspective because they're going so deep on these things and they're living it. If they were at, kind of similar perspective as you, they'd probably have the same idea. But like knowing that other people, hey, if I bring this idea to someone who has kind of a fresh perspective on this and maybe has less of an emotional attachment to certain stakeholders because you feel a certain way on a call, that to me has been like a really big eye opener going from, rep or frontline manager, to CEO on some of these key deals is like, if I was doing this, I could see exactly why they would think that. And it's like, hey, like, I know this champion's really great. And they said they'd make this intro, but like, hey, now it's been a week. And if you had the same perspective as me, I get why you don't feel like that. I get why you feel like this might be crossing the line with them. But objectively, this is what happened. If they are the champion, they're not going to mind if this happens, right? And they're like, yeah, you're right. So I think just understanding the different perspectives, similar to that AE's talking to BDRs, like the BDR could have a way better idea here. It's not just because their role, it's just such a different perspective that I feel like is super helpful at these stages of the companies.
For sure. And as a sales leader, like we get so much exposure like across the team.
Yes.
You learn a lot more, a lot faster because you're getting other people's perspective, other people's selling styles, a whole array of deals of different sizes and complexities. And to your point about like different set of opinion or perspective is like, I worked in procurement software for 2.5 years. There's nothing I know better than a procurement buyer. I know it so well. I call it my superpower because I sold to arguably the hardest negotiator in a company for 2.5 years. So I know that extremely well. And I know all of the things. And it's not because I'm better than anybody else at necessarily negotiation. It's because I have that perspective of that group that I sold to for 2.5 years, right? And I think our company is so good at that. Like I call my director all the time, probably once a day, and like, hey, I just need to talk through something and get your perspective on it. And she helps me come up with my best ideas because she will push back, she'll challenge me, she'll ask questions that I didn't think about. And my CEO will call me, hey, I'm working this deal. What do you think about this? And he, same thing, doesn't have an ego when he's curious about like, how do we approach this problem? And I think it comes from the top down, right? Like our CEO is very much like that, has that perspective. Our whole executive leadership team is. And I think that exudes down into our company culture. And I think as long as everybody can continue to adopt that culture and we continue to hire people that have that mindset, I think it's really our superpower to make sure that we're surrounding our deals and moving as fast as possible and as agile as possible.
Amazing. Well, I could talk about, this forever. But maybe to wrap up for the audience, kind of the three key things that we just talked about. The first one being really understanding the numbers. If sales makes sense at the end of the day, your pipeline times conversion rates times ACV, et cetera, like really knowing those and owning your book of business is so important. And now, like you said, the transparency that you get from all these other tools. Talked a lot about the ROI of time, Taylor's famous expression at CoLab. Understand where you need to spend it. And sometimes that having more pipeline obviously typically solves all problems, but if you don't have that focus and don't understand where to spend that time, it can be very distracting. And then lastly, all about, low ego, learning and kind of understanding those different perspectives, which I think is a lot of times, like you said, the superpower of especially startups. Like you don't get that the more layers you have. So how to use that to your advantage. But a lot of fun. I got a lot of things to think about for our own business here, Taylor, which is always a good, a good thing coming out of these. But appreciate you taking the time. We'll let you get back to closing those deals.
Cool. Thanks so much for having me.